Welcome back to Mind Over Media. This is episode 4, and we've reached a critical turning point in our series. If you recall, episodes 1 through 3, we traced propaganda from Edward Bernays' psychological experiments to Donald Trump's digital manipulation machine. We've learned the techniques, we've seen them in action, and understood how social media amplifies them. Now, we need to confront what all this means for democracy itself. This episode is called The Industrial Scale Assault on Democracy, and that scale is deliberate, okay? Because we're not talking about an occasional propaganda campaign anymore. We're talking about manipulation as a factory process running 24/7 across borders, targeting democratic systems worldwide. This is about how propaganda stopped being a tool and became an industry, how it stopped being a tactic and became an infrastructure, right? How it stopped threatening individual elections and started threatening democracy as a system. This is going to be a heavy episode, right? But understanding the threat, I think, is the first step towards defending against it, right? So let's begin, shall we? A decade ago, propaganda was boutique. Political campaigns hired consultants. Consultants crafted messages, and those messages reached audiences through traditional advertising. Now, when we compare advertising then to today, that process was slow, expensive, and pretty much limited in scope. But today, propaganda is industrial. It operates at factory scale with assembly line efficiency. And current research shows that social media manipulation by political actors has become an industrial scale problem affecting democracies globally, right? It's a precise description of how manipulation now operates. And what does industrial scale mean, right? Let me break it down. One, you need volume, right? Millions of coordinated messages posted daily across platforms, right? Then there is speed. Instant global distribution across time zones and languages. Then there is automation, bot networks generating content without human intervention. And then there's coordination, centralized operations controlling thousands of accounts simultaneously. And then there's the commercialization. Companies, yes, companies selling manipulation as a service to the highest bidder. See, this is the propaganda equivalent of moving from handmade goods to mass production. And like industrialization and manufacturing, is fundamentally transforming the landscape. Let me show you what I mean, right? Let's look at the propaganda factory from the ground floor. Let's call it the assembly station, right? And see how industrial scale manipulation actually works. So assembly station 1, starting from the ground floor, is data harvesting, right? Every click, every like, every share, and every pause gets collected by platform algorithms, right? This data builds detailed profiles predicting your fears, your desires, your triggers, your vulnerabilities. Companies that specialize in this, they're called data brokers. They buy and sell this information. Political operatives purchase it to target you with customized propaganda designed specifically to manipulate your psychology. Assembly station number 2, content generation. AI systems now create propaganda automatically. Chatbots write thousands of tailored messages per minute. Deepfake technology produces fake videos indistinguishable from reality. Language models generate persuasive text matching any style or tone. Yeah. Research into AI and disinformation found that generative AI tools lower the cost of producing synthetic content and make disinformation faster, cheaper, and more effective. Assembly station number 3, distribution networks. Bot armies spread content across platforms simultaneously. Influencer networks, real humans, are paid to seed narratives, in other words, to plant narratives embed messages into niche communities. Coordinated, inauthentic behavior makes manufactured content appear organic. Assembly station number 4, algorithmic amplification. Platform algorithms boost engaging content regardless of its accuracy. It doesn't have to be accurate. No. And since outrage and fear drive engagement, propaganda gets amplified while the truth gets what? Buried. Assembly station number 5, echo chamber maintenance. Now, filter bubbles, I mentioned in the last episode, keep target audiences isolated from counter narratives. So in other words, Trump's base, MAGA supporters, they live in this filter bubble, right? So anything that we say, non-Trump supporters, that's contrary to what they believe or counter to their narrative, they're not listening. And here's the thing, once someone enters a propaganda ecosystem, algorithmic filtering ensures they stay right there. This isn't a metaphor, folks. This is how modern propaganda literally operates as an industrial process. When we talk about propaganda industrialization, it isn't limited to one country. It's a global arms race, and it's accelerating. Research tracking worldwide manipulation campaigns found that organized social media manipulation occurs in over 70 countries. Over 70. And these aren't isolated operations. They're coordinated efforts by state actors, political parties, and commercial firms. Let me give you an example of how this plays out. Russia. Russia operates sophisticated disinformation networks targeting elections in Europe and North America. The Internet Research Agency, which is Russia's propaganda factory, runs thousands of accounts sowing division and undermining democratic institutions. They're not alone. Then there's China. China deploys what researchers call computational propaganda to suppress dissent, promote party messaging, and influence global opinion on issues like Taiwan and Hong Kong. Doesn't stop there. Iran, right? Iran, tomato, whatever you want to, however you want to pronounce it, right? Iran runs coordinated networks impersonating American activists to deepen political divisions and promote chaos. And then there are the commercial operators. These are private companies who now sell manipulation services, i.e. bot networks, coordinated messaging, right, to anyone with money. Democracy has become just another market where influence is bought and sold. And here's what's really terrifying. Trump's success showed all these actors that digital propaganda works. His victory in 2016 and his near victory in 2020, despite losing the popular vote, proved that social media manipulation can overcome electoral disadvantages. Yeah. Research also found that Trump's methods created an international arms race in disinformation, with foreign governments viewing his techniques as implicit permission to manipulate democratic processes worldwide. Yeah, you heard that right. Other countries are taking their lead from the felon himself. So let's examine a concrete example, right? In the 2024 election, right, which researchers describe as a watershed moment in industrial scale propaganda, right? During the 2024 presidential election, studies found that disinformation did change. It did indeed change behavior in 2024, with voters who demonstrated being misinformed about key issues preferring Trump. Right. But what made 2024 different, I think, was the scale and the sophistication of the manipulation infrastructure. Right. Because with that, research uncovered coordinated networks of 34 accounts amplifying conservative narratives and Donald Trump's presidential campaign across multiple platforms. Now, these accounts were just the visible tip, folks, meaning this is just what we could see. Beneath them operated what investigators call influence operations. And that involves AI-generated content indistinguishable from human creation, deep fake videos of candidates saying things they never said, coordinated bot networks amplifying specific narratives, micro-targeted ads exploiting individual psychological profiles. And then, of course, we know about this, foreign interference operations from Russia, China, and Iran. And one particularly disturbing finding, approximately 45% of Trump supporters cited immigration as a top concern based on manufactured narratives about migrant crime waves, despite data showing that immigrants commit crimes at a lower rate than native-born citizens. Make that make sense. See, this wasn't voters being misinformed. This was voters being systematically disinformed by industrial-scale propaganda operations. It didn't just happen by chance, right? Folks were manipulated via propaganda. And then we have to talk about the platforms, their complacency. And I want to say this, and I don't want to attack the platforms, because here is an uncomfortable truth, right? The propaganda factory couldn't operate without platforms themselves being complicit. Understand? None of these propaganda factories would operate without the platforms themselves being complicit. And I'm talking about social media platforms, folks. Social media platforms make money through engagement. Their business model depends on you scrolling, keeping you scrolling, clicking, sharing. And what drives that engagement? Outrage, fear, anger, division, dysfunction, chaos. All of that drives engagement. And according to a Harvard research, it found that the platforms function as more powerful than, and I mentioned this in episode 3, than any institution since the pre-Reformation Catholic Church, specifically, again, because they control what information reaches billions of people. It's one thing when you control the media. It's another thing when you control the media and you control the dissemination of the information, of the content. But here's the thing, unlike the Catholic Church, platforms deny responsibility for the content that they amplify. So in other words, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, they all deny responsibility. They claim that they're neutral infrastructure and they're merely hosting content that users create. And yes, they are right to a certain extent, but this is a lie, because studies show that platform algorithms actively choose what you see based on engagement metrics that favor extremism and manipulation. Yeah, I said this in the last episode. Anger is the contagious currency of social media's profit machine. And here's the thing, platforms could change these algorithms. They could prioritize accuracy over engagement, truth over viral content, democratic health over profit, but they choose not to. They don't want to. This creates what researchers call algorithmic governance, where platforms make political decisions about discourse while pretending to be neutral. So these social media platforms are not neutral, folks. They're there to facilitate the growth of the dissemination and the growth of propaganda. In reality, their choices about what gets amplified and suppressed shape democratic outcomes. Perfect example, when Elon Musk transformed Twitter into a pro-Trump echo chamber, he proved that platform owners can directly influence elections through infrastructure control. That's not free speech, folks. That is industrial scale manipulation enabled by platform design. And one of the most devastating effects of industrial propaganda is what researchers call the fragmentation of shared reality. So in healthy democracies, citizens disagree about solutions but agree on basic facts. Industrial propaganda destroys this foundation by creating parallel realities where different groups literally perceive different truths. Right? Have a conversation with a MAGA supporter. Completely different truths. Research into echo chambers and filter bubbles found that people increasingly exist in these isolated information ecosystems with no overlap, meaning nothing that you're saying that's contrary to MAGA supporters is even getting in at all. Trump supporters and opponents don't just disagree, they inhabit completely different factual universes. Yeah. Studies show that 89% of Trump supporters, when believe that Biden's election, had Biden won, would have caused lasting harm to the United States. Yeah. And that's not just policy agreement, folks. That's apocalyptic worldview divergence. That's all that is. Right? And this happens, I would argue that this happens because industrial propaganda doesn't just spread lies, it systematically undermines the concept of truth itself. Say that again, David. Industrial propaganda doesn't just spread lies, it systematically undermines the concept of truth itself. And when you're flooded with contradictory information, when fact-checking can't keep pace, when trusted sources are labeled fake news, many people give up trying to determine what's real. This creates what's called truth decay, the diminishing role of facts in political life. And once truth decays, propaganda fills the vacuum. The consequence of industrial scale propaganda is what political scientists call democratic backsliding. And that is the gradual erosion of democratic norms and institutions. Right? More research tracking global democracy found some of these trends to be concerning. One, voter suppression. In other words, propaganda campaigns using fear-based messaging targeted marginalized communities, decreasing turnout and skewing results. Polarization intensification. Algorithmic amplification of extreme viewpoints fractures social cohesion and undermines the possibility of compromise. Yeah. Institutional delegitimization. Systematic propaganda campaigns erode trust in courts, media, scientific institutions, and election systems themselves. Authoritarian normalization. That is the repeated exposure to authoritarian rhetoric, and it makes anti-democratic ideas seem acceptable. Studies also show that countries once considered democratic paragons now face significant democratic erosion accelerated by online manipulation. And if you think that's frightening, here's what's really frightening. This process itself is reinforcing. So as democratic institutions weaken, they become less able to regulate propaganda. As propaganda intensifies, democratic institutions weaken further. It's a downward spiral. So I think that the biggest question is, why has propaganda industrialized? Simple. Like most things, because it's profitable. Entire industries now exist around manipulation. Social media platforms make billions from engagement regardless of content quality. Data brokers sell detailed psychological profiles to propaganda operations. Bot farms rent coordinated networks to amplify any message for a price. Disinformation for hire. These companies offer full-service manipulation campaigns. Yes. Political consulting firms. They deploy tools for clients globally. Research also found that disinformation economy has grown to a multi-billion-dollar industry with standardized services, competitive pricing, and global reach. So there are companies out there who are offering services of manipulation. This creates these perverse incentives, right? So the more democracy is undermined, the more money these industries make. They have a financial stake in democratic dysfunction. And because these operations often work across borders, regulation is extremely difficult. A bot farm in Macedonia can influence American elections. Russian operatives can pose as Texas activists. Chinese propaganda can target Taiwanese voters. Yes. Folks, the propaganda factory operates globally while democracies remain trapped in national regulatory frameworks. One particular insidious aspect of industrial propaganda is what researchers call the exhaustion strategy. You all remember how Trump created these nonstop news making with a deluge of announcements that made it difficult to easily track and understand what's happening? Yeah, that's not a bug. It's a feature. Industrial propaganda deliberately overwhelms people with so much information, contradiction, and controversy that they become exhausted and disengaged. This achieves several goals. One, cognitive overload. When people can't process the volume of information, they rely on emotional shortcuts rather than careful analysis. And then there's the fact-checking failure. Truth can't compete when lies come 100 times faster than corrections. And then there's the democratic disengagement. Exhausted citizens stop participating, leaving a political space for manipulators, right? Then there's the normalization of chaos. Constant crisis makes people nostalgic for strong leaders. So that's sort of like Trump, right? When he creates this chaos and these crises, he puts himself in a position where he looks like a strong leader, and he's not. And these strong leaders promise to cut through the noise, even if those leaders created the noise. You understand what I'm saying? So this is propaganda as information warfare, not trying to convince you of a specific truth, but overwhelming you with capacity to determine truth at all. I mean, to determine whether or not truth even exists. And then there's the threat of democracy. And I'm going to be direct here. Industrial scale propaganda threatens democracy's survival as a system of government. Democracy depends on informed citizens making reasoned choices based on shared reality. Industrial propaganda systematically undermines all three requirements. Number one, it creates misinformed rather than informed citizens through targeted disinformation. It replaces reasoned choice with emotional manipulation by exploiting psychological vulnerabilities. It destroys shared reality by fragmenting society into incompatible information ecosystems. Research into AI and democracy warns that these trends are accelerating. One study asked, can democracy survive the disruptive power of AI? And the answer isn't really clear right now, because when propaganda can be automated, personalized to exploit individual psychology, right, distributed globally into, I'm talking about milliseconds, and then amplified by algorithms optimized for engagement over truth, democratic systems face a huge threat they were not designed to handle. And I'm going to go back to episode 1. Bernays wanted an invisible government of enlightened elites. What we got was an invisible algorithmic government serving profit, power, and authoritarian interests. So, how do we know that the democratic system is eroding? How do you know that industrial propaganda is succeeding in undermining democracy? A couple of things that you can watch for. Sign number 1, fact rejection. When significant portions of the population reject basic verifiable facts in favor of partisan narratives. Sign number 2, industrial distrust. When trust in courts, media, science, electoral systems collapses, institutional distrust sets in. Sign number 3, violence normalization. When political violence becomes acceptable rhetoric or action. Sign number 4, authoritarian appeals, when leaders openly admire dictators and suggest suspending democratic norms. Does that sound familiar, folks? Sign number 5, information chaos, when distinguishing truth from fiction becomes nearly impossible for the average citizen. See, all of these signs are present in democracies worldwide right now. Industrial propaganda isn't a future threat. It is a current crisis, folks. The stakes are high. So we've examined how propaganda evolved from Bernays' boutique manipulation into industrial scale assault on democratic systems worldwide. We've seen the factory process of modern propaganda operations, the global arms race and digital manipulation, platform complicity in amplifying propaganda for profit, the fragmentation of shared reality, the democratic backsliding enabled by information warfare, economic incentives driving manipulation, and the exhaustion strategy overwhelming citizens. Folks, this is the most serious threat to democracy since the rise of, since folks who try and undermine democracy with these authoritarian ideas. But unlike previous threats, I think this one operates invisibly through devices in our pockets. Distinguished as it may seem, when we're all on social media and we're getting our stuff is trending, and these devices, the disguised as entertainment, news, and social connection, they all work to manipulate. So in our next episode, we're going to zoom in on one of the most powerful weapons in this industrial propaganda arsenal, bot networks. We're going to explore how automated accounts representing just 1% of users can generate 31% of political content during major events, and what that means for genuine democratic discourse. The situation, folks, is becoming serious, and I'm not trying to scare you, but awareness is powerful. Okay, understanding how the propaganda factory operates is the first step to shutting it down. So until next time, do me a favor, stay conscious, stay critical, and remember, defending democracy now means defending your own mind from industrial manipulation. All right, this has been episode 4 of Mind Over Media. I'm your host, and I will see you next time, right? Till then, y'all be safe.